What if you built your own Pokedex and learned Gatsby JS in under 90 minutes? In this video, not only are you going to build your own Pokedex, you're going to have your own filters of the Pokemon type. You're also going to learn about how to create Gatsby blogs using markdown files and fetching data through the Gatsby GraphiQL queries. On top of this, it's quite easy to learn, and if you already know React, this should be a breeze. So let's get started. So what we're covering in this project is we have search functionality, but first of all, what we're doing is we're fetching all the Pokemon, and we can limit this to a certain amount, but I'm fetching all of the Pokemon here and rendering it on the page. I can also select the type of Pokemon. So let's select a fire type. You can see I've got all the fire types in here, and if I wanted to search it via the search over here, I'm just going to type in Flareon, and you can see Flareon shows up. If I remove this and click through to a Pokemon, so let's choose Arcanine. You can see here we go to /Pokemon/Arcanine, and this is a static site generator, which is Gatsby. So again, I'm using the PokeAPI to get the relevant Pokemon data specifically for Arcanine over here. We've got his Pokemon types, attack, defense, special attack, and so on. But you can choose whatever comes from the API. The API itself is being fetched from a GraphiQL endpoint, which is built into Gatsby, which uses GraphQL under the hood, and we'll be having our own playground that we'll install as well. If we click back, we get all of the Pokemon in here. We can select the number of Pokemon that we want to call in our API call, and also we have the search functionality over here. One final thing we want to look at is we have articles as well, which are displayed using markdown data, and these are pre-built. So if I click through to articles, we have our blogs in here, which are the Poke blogs. If I click through to one, so let's check the top 10 types of water Pokemon, and you can see Lugia is the top one, but essentially this is all pre-built static site HTML. And the way to check that we have all of the pages rendering, if we navigate to a separate path that we don't have built, so let's just type in anything and press enter. What Gatsby does is it shows all of the pages that we have pre-built on the application. So you can see here we have a full page, a HTML. We have all of our Pokemon, as you can see, but all of this is pre-built at build time. So that's the benefit of using Gatsby, which again is good for SEO because the screen readers and web crawlers can look at your site and see what is being rendered. So that's good for SEO as well. But there are other tons of benefits with Gatsby. So if we go to the website over here, what we also have is a plugin section, which we will look at later on, where we inject the plugin into our app and we can use that to fetch data in a graphical query. But what I'm going to do is quickly read this, which is Gatsby is a React-based open source framework for creating websites, whether your site has 100 pages or 100,000. If you care deeply about performance, scalability, built-in security, then you'll love building with us. In my opinion, this is one of my top 2 React frameworks along with Next.js. But what we will do, we have how-to guides over here. So you can use Gatsby image, which is a optimized image that is rendered on your application. We will look at that later as well. And if I go back into my app now, I can also choose the relevant page that I want to go to. But also, we are going to be building a custom 404 page. So here, you just hit a route that doesn't exist, the sadness. If we click back to the home page and also the Pokedex, we have all of our Pokemon here, which again has the filtered functionality. And again, we have the articles. So we'll be looking at the file structure and how we build this application. Other than that, I don't think there is much of a difference with React. If you've coded with React before, you'll pick this up quite easily. It's just the different ways that everything gets rendered, but we'll look at that in detail. And again, if you want to learn Gatsby, and Gatsby is a very popular React framework, then let's get started with this build. Right, so if you set up your code editor, in my terminal over here, what I'm going to first do is check the Node version. If you haven't got Node.js installed on your machine, then I would advise to download that on nodejs.org. But what we want to do is check the Node version, so it will be node-v to check the version. And at the minute, we're on Node version 14. We want to change this to Node version 18. So I have a package called nvm. Again, you need to download that and install it on your machine. So nvm use, and I'm just going to type in 18 for version 18. So now we switch that, we can just do node v again, and we're on Node version 18. So let's clear that first of all. What we want to do next is we need to install the Gatsby CLI. So the way to do that is install it on your machine globally. So that would be npm i-g and then it will be Gatsby-CLI. I already have this installed, so if you install this, if you've never used Gatsby before, I'm going to delete that, and we are going to create a new instance or a new project with Gatsby. So let me just quickly expand my code editor, and I'm going to type in the command. So it'll be Gatsby space new and then the site name. So I'm just going to call this Pokedex like so, and press enter. And now what will happen is Gatsby will install all of the modules and node modules that we need, and it will set up the project for us. So now that is installed, what I want to do is if I expand this Pokedex, you can see a list of all these files in here. What I want to do is move them out into the higher folder, and then we can delete this Pokedex one because we don't need that. And now if we go through the file structure, we have a source folder which has components, images, pages, templates as well. So what I want to do is I want to npm start this first of all. So let's run this now. So it'll be npm start, press enter. So now what's happening is it's going to run Gatsby develop. And again, I have my final build already open. So I want to create a new port this time. This port will be 3001. What this will also show is a graphical instance because we have a GraphQL endpoint here. So we'll look at that later on, but let's open this first of all. And if we go to the browser, let's close this down. And here we have the final build, and let's check the template out. So now you can see it says, welcome to Gatsby. You can go to a tutorial, which I've clicked on, and you can essentially walk through it, but we'll go through it ourselves. So let's go back onto the local host. Here we have some examples of websites. So again, in your own time, you can check this out. We have tons of examples here. So all I want to do now is remove this and get a clean fresh project set up. So let's go back into the code. We have the components, we have the images, we have the pages and the templates. But if you go down here, you can see we have Gatsby SSR.js. So let's go into this one. Now here it's got commented out code which says implement Gatsby's server-side rendering APIs in this file. So anything you want server-side, we can add it onto here. In this video, we won't be doing any server-side rendering because this is a basics course, but essentially it's just fetching the data on the server side. So it gives you that option as well. Again, if we go into Gatsby Node.js this time, this is essentially a Node API in the file. So we also have a backend where we can create pages and we can render the relevant path. So in this case, it's /using DSG, which is a feature from Gatsby, which is deferred static generation. Again, that is in the templates folder in here, but in this build, we won't be covering that as it's an advanced feature. What we're going to be covering is the basics. So export.create pages, which is an async function. We're destructuring the actions from there and getting the create page functionality. But if we want to go into this further, you've got this URL over here available on the action. So let's close this one down. The Gatsby config, which is quite important for us because this will configure your site. So configure your Gatsby site with this file. So again, we have site metadata, title, description, author, and so on. And plugins is what we are going to be working with. There's a plugins marketplace, which I mentioned earlier on. We will be exploring that further. And then we also have the Gatsby browser JS for any browser APIs. Again, we won't be using this functionality in this build. So what we're going to be doing is ignoring these files over here, other than the Gatsby config, which is quite important for us. So we also have a prettier installed as well, and a git ignore, which is common in React frameworks. Again, if we go into templates and in Gatsby Node.js, we had this component called require.resolve. In the templates, we are using dsg.js. So this template here is the structure or the HTML that gets rendered out when we create the page in the Gatsby Node.js. So again, hello from DSG page, and we can navigate to this if we go to /using DSG. So let's copy this path here and go into the browser, paste that in and press enter. And now you can see this page gets rendered in here, which is the one in the templates folder. So let's go back into the home page and quickly just go over the other one. So we have the pages, we have a 404 index.js, a page 2 using SSR, and we also have a using types. You can delete this, but in our case, we are using TypeScript, so we will change everything across from JS to TSX. We have images, which get rendered using Gatsby image, and we also have our components in here. So what we'll do next is we'll get started with the build. Right, so what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to rename everything from JS to TSX, so I'll go ahead and do that. Right, so now that I've done that, I'm getting a few errors in here on the pages. So again, we just need to fix these errors. So if I go into the not found page, we are using a SEO title that we are passing in as props, but this SEO is a component. So we have a reusable SEO component which renders the SEO for us and adds the meta names in here and also the title for your application, which is quite handy. So again, these titles and children are not defined as a type. So let's go ahead and define them. So we can do this inline in here like so, which is essentially description, title, and children. And description and children are optional. So the only thing we really need is the title. So fix that issue there. And essentially that would fix the issue across all of the pages because the SEO component is being rendered in all of the pages in the head. So now that's fixed, what I want to do is instead of using module.css and layout.css in here, I want to install styled components. Now the way to do that is add it in through a plugin. So we're going to look at plugins. So the way to add a plugin is if we go into GatsbyConfig.js over here, we have this section which is called plugins, and we already have Gatsby plugin image installed, which is a image compressor. It also optimizes your images. It's similar to Next.js image tag, which I've discussed in my other videos. And we have a Gatsby source file system, which has the name of images, and it resolves a path for the directory name /source/images, which is all of the images in here. So that is a path that we need to look out for. We have a Gatsby transformer shop and a Gatsby plugin shop. We have a Gatsby plugin manifest, which renders our manifest.json. So we will leave that there. If I go into the browser on the Gatsby docs over here, if we go to the top where it says open source and click on Gatsby plugins, and I'm going to just open this in a new tab. Now you can see it says welcome to the Gatsby plugin library. So you can add functionality and customize your Gatsby site or app with thousands of built-in plugins, which are over here. So we have MDX integration, which we will use. We have Remark, Airtable, and so many other options over here. So what I want to do now is install styled components. So I can search for styled components. So if we just do Command F and styled components, and now you can see here it's in the CSS and UI section. You can also add these plugins in here if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it simple and use styled components. And it's quite easy on how you would install it. So all you need to do is copy this. So let's copy the install script in here. Let's cancel the project for now and paste this in and install Gatsby plugin style components, and Babel plugin style components. So whilst that's installing, if we go back into the docs, and it says here how to use, and we was looking at Gatsby config.js. So all we need to do is add this object that we have over here into the Gatsby config.js, which is where all of our plugins are in this plugin array over here. So let's go ahead and do that. So back in Gatsby config.js, and I'm just going to add the object here. And what you can do is you can also add options in, but all we need to do is just add it in as the one. So what I'm going to do instead is cut this out here and add it in just after as a string and not an object. So now we have Gatsby plugin image and style component already installed. So if we go across in here, we have options such as display name false, and you can also read this further, but what I want to do is press back. There's quite a few plugins in here that we can use, but let's go ahead and get started with adding style components in now. So what I want to do is delete the layout CSS file and also the index module CSS file. And I'm going to run npm start again, and we're going to be working on the homepage first of all. So let's go ahead into the homepage on pages, index.tsx, and we have quite a few links in here that we don't need because I'm going to delete them. And again, sample page links. We're just going to start the homepage from afresh. So let's just delete all of this and the styles as well. And I'm going to delete everything within the layout. So let's delete that. And I'm just going to render a H1 just saying homepage. And if we run npm start, we are getting an error, which is quite common in Gatsby. So what we need to do is we need to make some changes to the package JSON file. So if we go in the package JSON over here, because we installed the style components plugins and the dependencies, what we now need to do is where we have our start scripts over here, what I'm going to do is where we run npm start, we also need to clean as well, because what happens is there is a cache buildup in this folder over here. So whenever we run npm start, what will happen is it will run Gatsby clean and then it will run Gatsby develop. So if we just change this script in here like so, and now we save all and close this down, and now if I run npm start again, it should fix that, because what it will do is it will clean the cache out and then restart the project again. So now it's loading, as you can see, and then it will build a development bundle. And then if we scroll up, we are getting another error, which is module not found, can't resolve layout CSS, because we've deleted that. So again, we need to go into the source of components and remove the import where layout CSS is. So now if we save all and run the project again, we now have the project running. So let's check the home page now. So if we press reload, and now you can see we have a header, a home page, and then the footer as well. So now let's go ahead and add our style component styles in here. So what we want to do is, because we've already have a layout component set up, what we can do is edit that. So in layout, in here, if we start from the top, layout component that queries for data with Gatsby's use static query component, we can remove this because we already have the layout component set. And at the top of the file here, what happens is we query for data using the GraphQL from Gatsby. So now what we want to do is we want to see this query in action. So what we'll do is we'll copy this query. So if we copy this, and in our terminal at the bottom, if we scroll up, you can see this, which says localhost 8001 GraphQL. So let's click through to that. And now you can see here we have a GraphQL playground in place. So the way to play with the playground is we can click here on the sides. We have quite a lot of functionality, but this is where we fetch our data from. So say, for example, we add a new plugin. So like in our case, it'll be the PokeAPI. It will get populated in here. We will then create a query like you would normally do in GraphQL. And then you will get that query and paste that into the page that you are fetching the data from. So in our case, what I want to do first of all is paste in this query here that we have, and you can also click through it on the side like so. But I'm just going to press play now, and you can see here it says the site metadata is the title Gatsby default starter. What I could also do is press enter and then control space on the keyboard, and it brings me a few different options that I can select, such as the description. And if I press play again, you can see the description of the Gatsby project. So kick off your next great Gatsby project with this default starter. And if we scroll here, you can see the same options are being shown on here. I can click site URL and that also gets added on, as you can see this over here. So now what we want to do is, if we change this, it should update on the GraphQL endpoint. So what we need to do is, if we go back into here, if we go into our Gatsby config, and at the top here, this is what we saw in our GraphQL playground, which is here. So let's go ahead and change this now. So I'm just going to bring in what I already have. So you can change it to whatever you want to change it to. In my case, it's going to be the title, description, and author. We can just keep the site URL the same for now. And now if I save, what will happen is it's going to write the page data and update everything. And in this endpoint now, if I press play again, you can see now it says title is Pokedex, description is site URL. And what I also want to collect is the author, which is myself. So now, as you can see, it says Imran Codes here. So now that is fetching the correct information. So if we go into here now, you can see it says Pokedex instead of what it said before, which is the default starter. If we go back into our home page, I'm just going to delete this as well. And if we explore the home page further, we have export console head, which is essentially the head of our page, and it's rendering the SEO component where we are passing in the title of home for this one. And then again, for 404, it will be the same again. So that's quite handy that we can inject the head per page. So going back into the layout, we have the data being fetched. The header is being set at the top, which is the header component, which we also need to fix. But for now, what I'm going to do is go into the layout.tsx, and where we are rendering the return block over here, I'm going to delete everything in here. So I'm just going to bring in my code. So you would have a theme provider. The header is what we had previously, which is what we are fetching from the GraphQL query. we have a main and also a default theme which we need to configure. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is create a new folder within our components called the layout. And in here, what I'm going to do is move the layout TSX in here because I want to be able to add the styles and then rename this to index. And now in the layout, I can then add my styles file relevant for the layout style. So styles.ts. And what I'm going to do is just paste in the main, which is export console main is equal to style.main. We have a font family in here, the margin, padding, height of 100 VH, and then the A tags for everything within the main will have the text decoration of none and the color of black. So if we go into here, we just need to import the main coming from the styles file, and then I just need to create the default theme. So if we close the components folder and the images folder and the pages, I'm going to add a new folder which is the styles folder. And in here, I'm going to create an index file. So this is going to be the main file for our styled component. So again, what I want to do is bring in my code. And essentially what happens is we have our colors. So the colors are going to be white, black, primary, secondary, and border, which are the predefined Pokedex colors. We have fonts as well that we are bringing in. And then we also have the default theme. So now that is being exported. We can then import it in our layout file over here. And finally, I just want to create a new folder for our types because we are using TypeScript. So new folder called types. And again, I wouldn't worry about the folder structure too much in this. It's more to get you familiar with Gatsby itself. You could create a better folder structure than this, but because the complexity of this project isn't that large, then I'm just going to create it on one single level like so. So in the types folder, I'm just going to create a new types file. And in the types file, I'm just going to call it theme.ts and just paste in my theme colors, which is essentially these colors here, as they are all strings. So let's go ahead and import this. So now that is our style component set. And let's save everything here. What I then want to do is I want to render and see if I can access the props of the primary color. So let's go back into the layout in here, and we have the main rendering the children, and the layout is then wrapping all of the pages now. So in our pages, we can just render the layout like so, and then instead of this now, we could do a H1. So this will be the home title. And again, what I can do now is create a page styles for this. So in styles, I'm going to create a new file called homepagestyles.ts. So now all I want to do is define home title. So let's go ahead and do that in homepage title. So export const of home title is equal to style.h1, and we can give it these styles in here. I just need to import styled from styled components, and then I'm just going to give the color from available from the props that we have created. So it'll be props.theme.colors.primary. So now if I save, I just need to import it in from the home page now. So let's go ahead and do that. And what you can also do is in our layout component, we could create global styles as well from style components, but I'm just going to leave that for now. So what I want to do next is to add the fonts so it is similar across the app to this font over here. Right, so what I want to do is add the font that I have added in my layout file. So in the layout component, if we go in here, in our main styled component, we have font family of Prahivia here. So what I need to do is, it's not working in the project. So in Gatsby, what we need to do is, again, the solution will be a plugin. So let's go into the plugin marketplace. So in here, we have plugin library, and we can search for whatever we need really in here. So I've already found the plugin that I need, which is the Gatsby Omni Font Loader. So what you need to do is it requires you to search for certain plugins. So you can search for it in here, or there are other companies that do plugins for you. So in our case, I already have the plugin, which is the Omni Font Loader from these guys over here, and this is the GitHub over here. So all we need to do is we can run this command over here. So let's go and run this in our project. So again, if we paste it in, and what we need to do is go into our Gatsby config. Once again, I already have everything configured. So let's go ahead and bring this in. So let's bring it in over here at the top. So what does this plugin do? It has options which are, it enables a listener to be true. It pre-connects the APIs of the URLs that we want to fetch from. So Google APIs and gstatic.com. And then we want to import the objects of the fonts that we require. So in our case, it's going to be this font and the Roboto font. And here are the file URLs. So now if I save all, what should happen is we should inject the main tag in our styled component with this font, and then this will then render on the UI on the home page. So let's run npm start once again. And each time we run npm start, what happens is it does a Gatsby clean, and then it starts the application. So it cleans up the cache, which is located here on the left. And now if we go into our home page and refresh the page, as you saw there, you can see now the font is being injected into the page, and this will be injected across the app because we have injected it onto the main tag, which is in our global layout component. So that is how you would add the fonts in Gatsby. Right, so what I want to do next is the header, which we have in our final build. So we have a link to Pokedex, we have a little image that's getting rendered. So we look at Gatsby image, and then we will navigate to the articles page. So let's get this one done, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the API fetching. So we're just building up and we're progressing step by step and learning new things as we go along. So if we go onto the header component now, so let's go into layout already. We have header.tsx, but what I want to do is create a new folder called header, and then we'll move header.tsx into there and rename this as the index, because what we need is the styles. So I'll add that in as well, which is styles.ts, and let's focus on the header. So this header does not look the best, so let's close or delete everything in here. And we are getting the site title from the prop, so we do want that. If I go into my final code in the header, we do have a header container, which is known as a header wrapper. So let's bring this in and I'll discuss it further. So this is all style component code. What we need to do is define the header wrapper, which is the wrapper or the container for everything. We have a link going to the site title, which is coming from the destructured props in here. But again, we need to do a query because the site title, we're not rendering that in anywhere. We need to query that. We have a logo container, which is essentially the Pokemon image that we have in the main header over here. And then we also have the articles that are being navigated to. So if we just copy the styles across into style.ts and paste this in, these should now be imported correctly because we're bringing them in from the relevant styled file. Now, this is where we need to do a query, and this is a different type of query now. So what I'm going to discuss is the two types of queries we can make. So as you can see here, we have use static query, which again is in a component. There is another type of query that we will look at when we fetch the data on the page, so on the home page for the Pokemon. So what we want to do is we want to copy this over here and then bring it into the header component here. So what we want to do is add it in before the return. So we need to return this in parentheses, and then wrap this here. And then this is where we would add our query. So again, we need to use static query. So let's import this from Gatsby at the top here. And we also need to import in the GraphQL as well from Gatsby. So now if I save, I'm just going to separate this out. So there's two sections on the header. We have the query at the top, and then we have the return block over here. So now what we want to do is we need to render an image. So first of all, when we looked at the file structure at the start of the video, if we go into Gatsby config.js in here, you can see if we keep scrolling down, there was this here which says Gatsby source file system. So in the options, we have the name of images, which resolves to this path, which is over here in the images here. So we do need this plugin. So if we go into the Gatsby library docs, this is pretty much the most popular one. You can see here 1.55 million downloads. This is pre-installed when we install the Gatsby new, so that's fine. But essentially, this plugin creates file nodes from files. The various transform plugins can transform file nodes into other types of data. So it essentially transforms our nodes into other types of data, such as markdown, remark nodes. This is important because we can then fetch that in here. So what I'm going to do is delete this, and I'm going to try and fetch the existing images that we have in our images folder, because they should be available once we add this in over here, and it's already added in. So let's go ahead and try and find Gatsby icon.png. So if we go onto here, and then we need to search for markdown remark. So let's close this one off, and you can see here now we're getting errors. This is how errors are shown in Gatsby. So as you can see here, it says all image sharp. So let's click that one, and then we want to go into nodes, and then in nodes we have, this is an object, so we can expand it like so. But if we did control space, if we did control space in here, we have all of these options in here. What I want to do is select Gatsby image data, which essentially is all of the image data that I want. So let's play that. And now you can see this is all of the image data that we need. You can see here I have one image of example PNG, which is that Gatsby image that we've seen, and we also have Gatsby icon PNG. So what I will do is, if I deleted the example PNG, let's see if that reduces down to 1 now. So going back in here, if I press play, we now have just the one. So that's quite handy. So everything we do is not imported from the file, but it's imported from the query in Gatsby, which is optimal and optimizes performance in your application. So what I'm going to do now is bring in that Pokemon image. So if I just bring in the Pokeball in here, so now I've got the Pokeball, which is going in the middle of our header. And then I press play again, and we have the Pokeball here, which is a WebP image. So now I'm going to delete the other one, because in this project we only need just the Pokeball. So let's delete that, move to trash. So now let me close this down, and I need to import Gatsby image from Gatsby plugin image, which again is coming from the Gatsby config as a plugin, which is already pre-installed, I believe. Let's just double check. If we scroll up, yeah, it's the first one. So let's close that down again. And now we have the header, and I'm getting this site metadata, but what I really want is the image data now. So if we go into the query over here, and all I want to do is copy this query because we need all of this information. And if we go into here and paste in the query and replace this one, so essentially we are using the static query. And this time I'm going to change this to the header logo and not destructure anything from it, because we need everything of Gatsby image data. Now you can see I'm going through header logo, and to see what is in header logo, all you need to do is console log header logo, and let's see what gets returned on the browser. So going into here, you can see there's an error, so let's not render that for now, and comment this out and save. Right, so now that I've got the header logo, all I want to do is console log it. So now if we go into our app and inspect, what we want to see is the header logo in the console. And here you can see an object, it says header logo, and then we access it all image sharp. Edges, we want the first index, which we get, then we get the node, then we get the Gatsby image data. So similar what we're doing in our app over here. So we are getting the header logo, all image sharp, edges, first index, node, and then the Gatsby image data. And then this will be the Pokemon logo as the alt tag. So now if I save, what will happen is it's rebuilding the development bundles. So now you can see there the Pokemon logo has loaded in. So now if I went to /test and pressed enter, we'll get a 404 page because this page isn't available. So now if I click back to this /, that navigates us back to the home page. And then again, this navigates us back to the home page as well. So let's close this down. Again, with the articles, which is what we look at next, if I click through to there, it says that the articles page is not there. So what we need to do is we need to build all of the articles and the articles page. So what we'll do is we'll do that next. Right, so now you can see we need to build the articles page. So let's go ahead and do that. If we go back in here, we now go into the pages. what I'm going to do is, first of all, delete this one because we're not using TypeScript in this build, and we're not also using server-side rendering, so let's delete that page. Page 2 is just a second page that we get in the boilerplate, so let's delete that. So now we should only have the 404 page and the index page. So essentially the 404 page is what we will implement later on, so we'll fix that after. So all I want to do now is in pages, I want to create a new folder this time, and this folder is going to be called articles. And then in articles, what we want is we want two files in there. We want one for all of the articles and then one for a single article. So let's go ahead and check it out in our final project. So we need to also fix that 404 page error, so we'll fix that. But if we go into articles, this is the first page, which is /articles, and then let's click this blog here, and this is the individual article in here. So we need to fix that as well. So let's go ahead and fix the 404 issue. So in here, it's just saying we need to import the relevant layout file. So let's import that in and now save. And in articles, what we want to do is we want to see the articles page when we refresh. So let's go ahead and do that. So in articles, we have two files. The first one is quite simple. It is the index page. So to restart our server, in articles, let's create the index, which is all of them. So this is where we are going to show all of our Pokemon articles. And in here, we are just going to copy a page. So let's go ahead and copy the 404 page, paste that in here, because we are using the layout and we are also using the head. So let's first of all import SEO, and this is going to be our Pokeblogs. Like so, we need to change this because this is going to be the blog page or article page. I'm just going to call it Pokeblogs, and we also need to import the layout. And now this will be the Pokeblogs H1, and we can also do home title, which is what we created for the styled component earlier on. Like so. So now if I save, it will rebuild the development bundle, and then we need to navigate to the home page. And then when we click through to the articles, you can see now it says Pokeblogs now instead. So that is the page being created, but what we essentially want is we want a list of articles here. So we want the Pokeblogs, and then we want an article that we create. So what we need to do now is we need to create an article folder. So let's go ahead and create that. This is where we will have our articles. So similar to components, images, and pages, we need to create a new folder in here. This one is going to be called the articles. And as you would with all articles, we would render that out in markdown format. And there's documentation in Gatsby about this. So if we search for markdown or MDX in here, and you can see here, transform data to use MDX. So what we will also need to do is use a plugin once again. So if you don't know what MDX is, it's essentially an extension of Markdown that lets you include JSX in Markdown documents. So this is the guide if you want to read more on a Markdown and how it works. So we need to add this extension in, but what I'm going to do is bring in my two Markdown files. So let me just copy them and bring them in to here and paste it in. What I'm going to do is I've created a duplicate, so let me just replace. And in the Markdown file, what I've got is I've got this excerpt here. So this is the excerpt that we will be rendering out. This will be the slug that we append to the URL. We have a date and we also have the title in here. And the syntax is quite simple to understand. This stands for a H1, and these two hashtag tags stand for H2. And there's other sort of ones that you can look at. There is a Markdown cheat sheet on the Gatsby website that you can read up more on. But essentially, the file names end in .mdx. So now that is our blogs all set. What we now need to do is we need to render the blogs. So the way we would do that is we need the MDX extension or the plugin. Then what we would do is query the data in our Gatsby GraphiQL here. So let's close this down, and we should have an MDX file in here that we can query the data from. So that's what we need to do next. So if we go in Gatsby config.js in here, and all we want to do is copy what we have done with the images, like so. So let's copy this and then paste it in here. So we're using Gatsby source file system, but this time what we are going to do is the articles, and then instead of slash source slash images, it'll be source slash articles like so. So then this will read this articles folder here, and then we can then query that data on the articles page. There is one more step we need to do, which is install a plugin. So that is Gatsby plugin MDX. So again, if we go into these docs over here, we need to go back, and it is this plugin we need here, Gatsby plugin MDX. So let's just copy this, and we just need to install it. We've already added the relevant section in the Gatsby config.js. So all we need to do is install this, and then it will look for our markdown files, and then we will then be able to query that in our graphical instance. So let's paste this in and install Gatsby plugin MDX. Then I also need to add it in here, and you can also clean this up so you can have all of the objects in one section, and then I can bring these and add these in at the top. And now if I save all and then run the app again, so npm start, what I should now see is the MDX extension in the Gatsby graphical instance. So let me go into the graphical instance over here, and now I just need to wait for the site to build. And now if we refresh and check the file structure now, and you can see here this has been added, which is all MDX. So I want to search for all MDX, and the query this time will be made on the articles page. So if I go into all MDX, then I go into the nodes, then I want to go into the front matter, and in the front matter I can get the date, the slug, and the title. The date, what I want to do with the date is format the string, so I want it to be month, 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 so 4 months space date, and then comma, year, 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 so like so. So now if I play, now you can see this is the same structure as what we have here, which is essentially the title, the slug, and the date, as you can see there. So now what I want to do is I want to copy this query over here, and then I want to render the data out on the articles page. So let's go in here, back in our project, and then in our articles, what I want to do is do a query. And this time, again, we need parentheses, and then we want to return like so. So then now, before the return, we can paste in the query. And this time, because it's on the page that we are querying, we're not using use static query. We're just going to be doing a normal query. So it's export const of query, and then we're wrapping it in GraphQL like so, and then we also closing it with the template literals like that. And then what I also want to do is import GraphQL from Gatsby, and let's move this out of the functional component. So now if I save, what will now happen is this query here will become available as props in the Pokeblogs function. So we can destructure the data now in here. And what I also want to do is give this a type. So this is react.fc, and this functional component will be the Pokeblogs props, which we need to define. So what we can do is we can do article types or create types. Let's just create them in here. So the folder is articles.ts, and I want to export this type. So export type of Pokeblogs props, and the props essentially are the data that we are getting. So let me just quickly import this. And what we will need to do now is check what is coming back from the data. So let's console log the data that we are receiving from the props from this query. And then this query can be whatever you want to name it as. And in this case, it is essentially Pokeblogs, like so. And one more little thing that I want to do is I want to order it and sort it out by the date of descending. So I'm just going to bring that in as well. So it's showing the latest one all the time. So now all I want to do is in here in our browser, let's inspect and see what data is being passed in to the props. So if we refresh the page, so now you can see here, data is being passed in. So again, you can see the query as all MDX, which is 2 nodes because we have 2 articles that we created. They both have front matter. So in the front matter, they have the date, the slug, and the title. So that seems correct. What I want to do now is essentially copy this structure and then create a type for it. So I've already done that. It's a little messy, but let's go ahead and add this in. So in articles.ts, paste this in, and what you should do is follow correct guidelines and practices and solid principles. You will then extract these into their own separate types in TypeScript. So I'm just going to leave it as it is because that is not what we are covering in this project, but you should do that if you have more time. So now Pokeblog's props is being received correctly. What we now need to do is render out all the data onto the page like we are doing in the final build. So let's keep the home title in there. What I'm going to do as well is destructure the data. So I want the nodes here like so. So let's delete this, and I'm destructuring the data. So I want access to the nodes, and then I'm going to map over them. So essentially we're going to map over the nodes and render out an article which I need to create. So let's go ahead and create this, which is a style. So again, I can create a style file in here. This is article page styles.ts, and this is a styled component. So style.article, it has a border getting from the theme and then a border radius and so on. So all I now need to do is import this in and also import link from Gatsby, because what we are going to do is we're going to link this to a URL. So this URL is coming from the slug that we are getting from the front matter within the node. So for each article, we will link out to there. That's on the node.frontmatter.slug. We have a posted section, and then we have the excerpt. So all of this is coming from this section here at the top, which is what we reference within these lines over here. So that's the excerpt. So now if I save all and go into the browser, you can now see that this is being rendered correctly. So the only thing missing is the excerpt. So all we need to do is in our graphical instance in here, if we do control space, we don't have the excerpt. So we need to add that in. So let's add that in here because the excerpt is important. So now let's play that. And now you can see the excerpts coming through. So it's essentially the first part of the article. So let's go ahead and add that in the query. So at the top here, we just need to add the excerpt and paste, and now save. And now you can see here, we have the excerpt also. So that is how you fetch all the blogs on one single page. Now what we will do next is create dynamic pages. So if we go into here, essentially we should be able to click through to this page here. So the top water type Pokemon, and see the entire blog. At the minute, this page doesn't exist. So that's what we'll be doing next. To fetch the single blog and then render that out onto the page, we also need to create the page based on the param in the URL. We should see the entire blog in markdown format on our whatever page it is on there. So if we go into here in our app, where we created the articles folder within the pages, I'm going to create a new file. This is a wildcard file, and what we need to do is paste in the following, which is curly brackets and then mdx.frontmatter _ slug .tsx. This is essentially the front matter slug that we are rendering on the URL param. What I want to do is copy what I already have, which is essentially a single blog post. This can be the single article or the single Pokeblog post, so I can just rename that. And then it's bad practice, but I'm just going to use the any keyword for the props and also bring in the layout like so. So we need to import this in from components layout. And then the props we are receiving is the data and the children. The way we would do that again is to do a GraphQL query. But this time what we want to do is query for the single blog. And the way to do that is get access to the blog excerpt or the slug in the URL. And then that way we will be able to query the single blogs. Let's go ahead and do that. I also need to import the SEO in here, and the title will be dynamic, as you can see here, data.mdx.frontmatter title. We need to import the query. Let's go ahead and try and get the queries. In our graphical instance, we have the all MDX, but this time we just want the single MDX. So this is how you would do it. And then the single MDX is going to be MDX of frontmatter. We need the title, and we also need the date. Let's get them. this is going to be equal to a certain ID. In our case, it will be the slug. So let's just copy this slug. And the date, what we're going to be doing with the date is to format it in the relevant way. But the title in this case will be the slug of top water type Pokemon. And if I press play, we don't get anything. So in the single MDX over here, what I want to do is filter out by the ID. So what I'm going to do is bring in code in here. All we need to do now is change this. The ID in this case will be the top water type Pokemon, which is what we copied earlier, and we want that as a string. So let's do that. Now, if we search, it just says we need to use double quotes. So let's go ahead and do that. Instead of all MDX, we now want to access MDX this time. So this is where we will get the individual markdown file, but this time we will filter based on the ID, which is coming from the URL over here. So if we go back into our code, at the top on line 4, what I'm going to do is paste in the query. We also need to import GraphQL. Now, if I save all, this page would have built, so the from matter slug would have built. We then query it with the ID that is relevant in the slug that we are receiving here. What would happen is in the data, we should get access to data.mdx.date, and then also the children will get rendered. First of all, console log the data, and then the children will get rendered on the app anyway. This is the individual blog post. Now, if I save and go into the browser, if I press back and then I click onto this one, you can see the blog post has generated. So if I scroll down and look at this individual blog post over here, you can see that the data is being passed in. This part here is the children that gets rendered on the page, which is essentially the blog post itself, but the data is essentially the MDX, front matter, the title, and the date get rendered at the top here. That is essentially how you would fetch an individual blog post using Gatsby. What we're going to be looking at next is fetching the data using the GraphQL instance, more specifically the Pokemon data, and then rendering it out here like so, and then adding the filters in as well. So now that we've completed the blog section, so the fetching of all of the blogs and then also linking out to an individual blog like so, what we now want to do is fetch all of the Pokemon and then render it out in this sort of grid format. And also this is responsive as well. So if we shrink the screen size, you can see it can go down to 2 columns instead of 1. So this is using display of grid. And you can see here, we are mapping out all of the relevant Pokemon and then linking them out. So what we're going to look at now is how to fetch API data using the GraphQL queries from Gatsby. So if I just close this down, the API we are going to be using is from a plugin called Gatsby Source PokeAPI. So as you can see here, I've got the documentation up. It's gatsbyjs.com/plugin/Gatsby Source PokeAPI. And here are the steps. They're quite simple. What I'm going to do is first of all, install this. So let's go into our project and just close our project down and paste this in. So what that does is it installs the PokeAPI. So again, what we need to do is access the Gatsby config.js. If we scroll down, we have all of our plugins here, and then the objects. If you wanted to extend the object, all we need to do is add the object of the Gatsby source PokeAPI in here. So quite simple. All we need to do is copy this object over here, and then back in our project and paste this in. So now what we are doing is we are using the PokeAPI and we are fetching the number of Pokemon as one of the options. So we could change this to whatever number we want, but I'm just going to select 251 as it is on the example. So let's save that. So what we want to do is we want to access the graphical layer and find this PokeAPI within our graphical Gatsby layer. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our graphical project here, so this is where we fetch all of our queries. So in here we should see a PokeAPI, but at the minute it's just running the project and it's installing all of the relevant dependencies that it needs. So because we've installed PokeAPI, it should turn up here. So now if we refresh the page, you can see here that we have the Pokemon showing up here on the side, and we also have the all Pokemon. So the all Pokemon is to fetch all of the Pokemon, and then we look at the individual Pokemon to fetch the single Pokemon. So first of all, if we go back in the docs, here it says how to query. So you can essentially copy this query But what we want to do is to select our own queries. If we go into our final build, you can see here, we're fetching the name only, and then we are also fetching the type of Pokemon here. So that's what we will need along with the final thing, which is the count of Pokemon. So at the minute, we have 251 being fetched. So all we need to do is in here, we select all Pokemon, and then we go into nodes. And in nodes, we have stats here, and we also have types. So I want the types, I want the image, I want the ID, and I also want the name. So let's play that. And now you can see here we have types as an array. So certain Pokemons have multiple Pokemon types. And then we have the image, which is a PNG image on a URL, and then the ID and also the name. And then the final thing we want is the total count. So all we need to do for that is click this one, which is total count here. And now if we press play on that, close the nodes down, and then here you can see the total count. So what we'll do is we will copy this query here, and I'm going to change this query name. So it's going to be all Pokemon query. And this query is going to be made on the home page. So this query will happen before the home page renders. So let's go into the home page here, and then all we need to do is export const of query or page query is equal to GraphQL, and then we paste in the query, and then we just close the query off like so. And then we also need to import GraphQL from Gatsby. So that is the query we make. And then in the props, we get access to the data. So let's destructure the data here. And what I'm also going to do is give this index page a type. So React functional component, and then we need to define the props type. So I'm just going to do it inline in here. So type of index page props is equal to the data, and then the data is essentially going to be this here. Now what you can do is extract this portion here into a Pokemon type. So what we'll do is we'll copy everything within the data, and I'm going to create this as an all Pokemon type. So if we go into types, and then I'm just going to create a new file, Pokemon.ts, and this type is going to be export type of all Pokemon type, like so. And then if you just paste it in, so now you have the old Pokemon type, and then you can extract this further, and then you can also create a type for the nodes as well. But I'm just going to keep it as it is. This isn't the best TypeScript, but essentially you have the type now. So we can copy this, and instead of this data here, now we can just paste in the old Pokemon type like so. So it just cleans up the page a little bit further, and then we just need to copy this and paste that in here. Again, you can create a types.ts file for this and extract that, and then the query is on the page here. So essentially now when we console log the data, we should be seeing the Pokemon data that we are fetching. So what we need to do now is just quickly clean this up a little bit and save, and then let's console log the data. And this is going to be the home page data. And I want to see if we are fetching the Pokemon data on the home page. So let's go into our browser, and if we click to the home page here, so we're on the home page, I just want to inspect and see if we are receiving the all Pokemon data. So at the minute, if we scroll up, we aren't receiving anything. Let's just refresh the page, and now you can see here we have home page data. So let's expand that, and the query we have made, so we are getting the nodes, which is correct, and there are 251 objects within the array of nodes, and we also are getting the total count. So let's just double check one of the nodes to see if that is fetching the correct data. So as you can see here, now we are fetching Bulbasaur, we have the image as well and the ID along with the types. So what we will do next is render that out onto the page. Right, so now we've fetched all of the data, let's just render it out onto the page. So on the final build, you can see here we have a filter section, but we'll leave that till later. Let's just get all of the Pokemon data. So at the minute, you can see we have a little hover effect, but each of these is a Pokemon card. So this can be a reusable component. So the way you would approach it is you have an image here. So you would pass an image down as a prop. You would also have the name, and then you also have the number of the Pokemon, but we're not fetching that. So what you can do instead is pass the index +1, because JavaScript starts with the number 0. So that will be the index, and then that way we have this UI rendering on the page. And then what we'll do is we'll tackle the color difference, and that is going to be based on the Pokemon type. So the type of Pokemon, for example, Pikachu is yellow because it is primarily an electric type Pokemon, whereas something like a Wartortle is blue because it's a water Pokemon. So we'll do that as well. So let's go ahead into our VS Code. So on the home page here, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I've got access to the data now and that's working. So I'll just delete the console log, and then what we can do is render the p tag, which is the number of Pokemon, and we're getting access to that. So I want to get a few constants here, which is the number of Pokemon, and that is equal to data.allPokemon.total count. So you can see here, if we go into all Pokemon, we have the node and the total count. So essentially we have total count as a number. I'm just going to optional chain this, so if data is not there, then it will essentially handle it and not return undefined. So number of Pokemon here, and what you could also do is do a nullish coalescing operator. So if this doesn't handle anything as true, then what you can do is you can put your own string in here of whatever you want in here. So we can do NA like so. So that is that section there set. So what I'm going to do is change this to number of Pokemon here, just so we have it separated out, or you could do it in line as well. So now that is complete. What I also want to do is create a div now to render all of the Pokemon in. And the way you would get access to all of the Pokemon is if we go back into the browser. You can see here we are getting all the Pokemon, so we need to access data.allpokemon.nodes.map. So what I will do is destructure the Pokemon, so const all Pokemon is equal to data.allPokemon.nodes. So now we have access to that. And what I'm actually going to do is rename this to all Pokemon. So now what I can do is in the div allPokemon.map, for each Pokemon I want to render a div. So let's render that div. And in this div, we're just going to render the Pokemon name, the Pokemon types, and also the Pokemon image. And then we also need to close this off now. And also we need a closing div as well, just to wrap the inner div. And now if I save and check the browser, you can now see we have the number of Pokemon, then it's got Bulbasaur, which is grass and poison. They're not separated, so we'll fix that. We have Ivysaur of grass and poison. The image hasn't loaded there, but you can see all of the images are being rendered and some aren't here. So what we need to do is go back into here, and let's render the image first at the top, like we have in the final build. And then we have the name. And then what we also want to do is render the number. So this will be the index +1. So this is the number of Pokemon. And now what we need to do is access the index. So in the map method here, if you hover over it, you have the first argument, which is going to be essentially the value. And then the second one here, you can see is the index, which is a number. So let's go ahead and get the index. So now if I save and go back into the browser, you can see now the numbers are being rendered. So what we want to do now is create a reusable Pokemon card component. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go into here, and what I'm going to do is copy this. And in components, we're going to create a new folder. And this folder is going to be called the Pokemon card. And this will receive props because we need access to the Pokemon image name and the index as well. So in Pokemon card, I'm just going to name index.tsx, RAFCE, and this is the Pokemon card. So if you notice in Gatsby as well, it's pretty much the same as React in a sense where we access and use functions, and we also have access to the React hooks. So that comes in handy. We'll look at examples later on where we use the useState hook especially. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in what I have, which essentially is the image, the name, and the index. So we need access to the Pokemon now. So let's pass that in as well and destructure it from the props. So let's save that. And now what we want to do is we want to go back into the pages here. And instead of returning this, what we want to do instead is return the Pokemon card like so. And let's delete this and add the slash in here. We need the key as the Pokemon ID for this component. So if we pass and import in the Pokemon card, so the key is the Pokemon ID. We also want to pass in the index, which is equal to the index as a prop. And then we also want to pass in the Pokemon itself. So let's pass that in here as well. So now we're passing in the props. We need to receive the props from the Pokemon card component. So we are receiving the index, which is a number, and then the Pokemon card, which is this Pokemon type here. So let's copy that. And in the Pokemon card, we just need to declare the type. So let's this time create a new file for the type, so type ts, and we need to declare the Pokemon and the index. So let's add them in. So export type of Pokemon card, which is equal to, and then essentially we are pasting in the first one, which is the Pokemon, and then we also need the index. So let's paste that one in as well, which essentially is a number. So if we save that, you can see now we have a Pokemon type and then the number. So let's just copy this and change this to a Pokemon type, and we'll change this to all Pokemon type. So we need to define this within this file here. So export type of all Pokemon type. So, and then if we just paste it in, all we need to do now is save this and delete this import. So export all Pokemon type is equal to this one here. And then we need to pass Pokemon card props into this React functional component here. So we're just making sure we are type checking everything that we're receiving. And we also need to pass in the index, which we are receiving from the Pokemon card component. So that's set now. So let's save this. And let's just double check everything is working. So if we go here, you can see the cards are rendering and the Pokemon are loading as well. So that's fine. What we need to do next is style it. So let's style the individual Pokemon card. So in the Pokemon card, let's go into there. And this div is essentially what we need to style. So let's call this div a container, which is relevant for this Pokemon card. So let's create a new file in here. And this is styled.ts. And it's going to be export const of container, which is going to be equal to style.div, and we just import that in. So it will have a display of flex direction of column. So everything within there is a column. It's going to align the items as center, and we are going to justify content as center as well. Margin of 0 and auto. So auto on the left and the right. We're going to have a padding of 1 rem and 2 rem. On top and bottom is 1, and then 2 on the left and the right. Border radius of 20 pixels, so that will be making the edges round. And then we also need the border of 1px solid, but the color will be coming from the theme. So we will do the selector like so, and then it's going to be theme.colors.border. So let's change that. And this border is in the theme file that we have defined earlier. So, and actually what we'll do is the border will be 2 pixels. So let's close this off and check everything is correct. So now going back in the Pokemon card, we just need to import this in from the /styled file. And if we save all, you can see now everything is looking quite similar and is taking shape. What we now need to do is define a grid that renders the 3-column row and then the 2-column row. And then we also need to add the background. So we'll do the grid next. So let's go ahead and do that. And the grid is going to be coming from the index page. So surrounding here, what we need to do is this div is going to be named as grid, Pokemon grid. And then we need to create a style component for this. So let's go ahead. We are in pages. So in the styles folder, we have the homepage style. So let's go in here. And this is going to be called export const of the Pokemon grid, which is equal to style.div. And essentially this grid is going to be display of grid. It's going to have 3 columns. So it will be grid template columns. And the columns will be 3 columns repeated as 1 FR. So it will be repeat of 3 and 1 FR like so. We are going to have a grid gap as well. So grid gap of 1 rem, and then text align of center. And then what I'm going to do is bring in the rest, which is media queries handling the certain breakpoints. So paste this in as well and now save. What I now need to do is import this in onto the home page. So let's paste this in as well. And now if we go into the browser, you can see here that everything is being rendered correctly. So, and now what we can see here is the grid spacing is correct on the X axis, but not on the Y. You can see here there's a massive gap in between. So let's just check what's happening here. So Pokemon grid, we are giving it a grid gap. So that's fine. So everything is fine within there. We just need to debug it in the Pokemon card. So in the container, what I'm going to do is add a few more styles. So what we need to do is style the image and the p tags. So what I'm going to do is paste in the image styles, which is a width of 150 px, an object fit of contain, and then the h2 will have a margin of 0, And then we also have hover styling, so that will make the image increase in size. So if we save and check the browser again, you can now see that the styles are working correctly, but then we also still have a gap here, which is quite large. And what I also want to do is give this a width of 100%, and then we just want to remove the padding now. So if I save and refresh the page, you can see here now, essentially the grid is now working correctly. The only difference now, what we need to make is the background colors dependent on the Pokemon type. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way we need to do that is we need to pass in the types of the Pokemon as props, more specifically the first type. So the top row, these guys are green because they're grass type, these are fire type, and then these are water, and so on. So let's go into the browser again, and this time we need to access the background color, and then we need to define the background color based on the type of Pokemon. So going back into the home page, into our Pokemon card, and then the Pokemon card is going to have a type, so we need to define the background color within the container. So we need to pass in the type into the props. So with style components, you can pass in props within the divs that, or the styled component that you are using. So in my case, I'm going to call this one types. You could call it Pokemon types is equal to the Pokemon dot type, and we want to access the first index because it's an array. So the first index will be the main or primary type for that Pokemon. So now we have access to types. This is going to be a string, or it could be a union type if you wanted to declare that as well. So let's go into container, and to receive props in here, all you need to do is add in the type. So it will be types, and I'm going to name this as a type of string, but again, you could do a union type as well if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and do the Pokemon types type. So in the types.ts here, I'm going to paste in the type that I have. So it's a union type that could be water, fire, grass, bug, normal, and so on. So there's all these are the different types of Pokemons, and I'm going to copy this. And in my styled, instead of a string now, I'm going to import the Pokemon types. So that is fine. What I also want to do is optional chain this. So types is equal to Pokemon.types of 0, like so. So what we need to do now is in the Pokemon card props in all Pokemon type, we just need to update that to a union type. So let's go ahead, and this types now will, instead of being a string, will be the Pokemon types that we have defined here. And then there is one more place where we need to update the all Pokemon types. So let's go into all Pokemon card props. In here, we have the all Pokemon cards. So if we now save, and in the style.ts now we have access to the types here. So what we now need to do is, dependent on the type we receive, we need to have a different background color. So let's do background color. And now what I'm going to do is destructure the type coming from the props. So to access that, you would do the $, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll access the types here. And we don't need the theme for this one. But what I'm going to do essentially is to do a switch statement. So essentially the switch statement will check for the types. And if the type is the certain case, then we can render a different color. So in our case, if it is the water type Pokemon, then we can return this color. And fire, you can also return the relevant colors. So I already have done this. So I'll copy this and bring this in. So now what we have is all of the Pokemon types in here, and this is dependent on what is received from the props up here. So now if I go into Pokemon card, the type of the Pokemon card is going to determine the background color that we have. So if we save this, and now you can see we have the green for the Pokemon grass types, and then the reds for the fire types, and so on. And now you can see it's all being rendered correctly. So what we will do next is to add the filters, so we can filter out the Pokemons that we want to see. So now what we need to do is to filter the Pokemon. So we have a search bar here, and then we also have the drop down filter for the type of Pokemon that we want to receive. So let's just search for the electric type Pokemon. You can see all of these are electric type Pokemon, and they are contained within the types array. So that is fine. But what if I wanted to search for electrode? I can add that in as well. So I can filter it down. So elect, and then there are two Pokemon with elect within their name. So that is fine as well. So let's add this into our functionality. So in our app, we need to render that over here. So let's go ahead and essentially create a search component or a search bar component, and then a drop down component as well. So in our components up top here, I'm going to create a new folder for the search bar. And essentially, this will have an index.tsx and RAFCE. So let's just quickly create this, which is a search bar. And in this search bar, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have two style components, which is a container, which is the div, and then the search, which is the input. The search input is of type text, and then the value and the on change will be coming from the props here, so it's reusable. So let's just add the search in here, and then also the set search. Whenever the user types in a character on the keyboard, then that is an event that changes and updates the search value based on whatever they type in, and it adds it in using the set search that is coming from the use state. So in Gatsby, as I mentioned before, we can use the React hooks, and then we also need to filter this. So whenever we map over the array of nodes in here, we are filtering based on the value that is coming from the search bar. So let's go ahead and add the style components in. So what I'm going to do is just paste in the styles for the search bar, and then let's import in the container from /styled and the search from /styled. So now if I save, I now need to render the search bar onto the home page. So let's go into the home page, and here what I'm going to do is render the search bar, and we also need to pass in the relevant prop. So what we need to do is create the state for this. So const search and set search is equal to react.use state, and initially it's going to be empty. So let's pass in the relevant search props. So search is equal to search, and set search is equal to set search. And again, this might not be the most optimal way to do your imports. You could use libraries like React Hook Form, or you could also use the use ref hook. So it's up to you how you want to do that. So let's save this. And now we have a search bar in here that when we type, nothing happens as of yet because it's not hooked into this grid here. But essentially, we are saving whatever we type in to the search field here. So that is the first one done. What I'm also going to do is do the same for the drop down. So let's just copy the drop down and paste it in as a component. Essentially, this index here now, it has a set type prop being passed in. So we initially have a piece of state for this. So let's go ahead and create that. But before we do that, we need to access the Pokemon type options, which is a helper, which means that we have an array of objects in here. And in this array of objects, essentially what happens is each one is a value. So initially we have the select Pokemon type value, and I'm just going to change this to an empty string because that is what we would have as the empty string within the piece of state. Then we have the fire type Pokemon, grass, bug, and so on. So this is the list we're going to map over in our drop down over here. So this is the list here. And then what we want to do is map over it, and then whatever we select, we would then hook that into this grid here as well. So let's go ahead and go into the index again. We're mapping over it. So for each type, we are having an option, and this is essentially a select drop down with each one is an option, and then we're rendering the name. So the styles are coming in here. So if you want to look further into the styles, they will be included in the repo as well. So that is the drop down component complete. We need to now render this onto the page, passing in the type use state. So let's go ahead and do that. So essentially the same piece of code, which is const type and set type is equal to an empty string of the React use state. And then we just need to render the drop down now and pass in the set type, which will update the state for type in here. So what I want to do is I want to console log the type, and I also want to console log the search just to see if everything is working correctly before we hook it into this Pokemon grid here. So now going back into the browser in our build over here, if we inspect, and we just need to create a container for this top section as well. In the console, if I expand this out further, and I'm just going to clear this out. So in here, if I typed in, for example, Charmander, you can see it's updating the state here. So it is re-rendering and Charmander is updating like so. And then if I was to select the type of Pokemon as fire, you can see now fire and Charmander are updating. And let me just double check if I do ghost, which is updating as well. So that would be like Ghastly or Haunter or whatever the ghost Pokemon is that you want. But essentially, these two components now are hooked up, and we now need to filter them out here, and we will do that next. Right, so what I want to do is create this section here. So we've rendered the search bar and the drop down. We just need to tidy it up a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a filter container. So let's do that now and paste in what the final code is. I also need to pass in the number of Pokemon here. And then we just need to import the search bar again. So that is all set. We just need to render and style the filter container. So going into the homepage styles in here, I'm going to create a new constant or a styled component of filter container, which is essentially a div. And this div will have a display of flex direction of column, and then the other styles here. So margin 0 auto, align item center. We have a padding of 2 rem all around, a gap of 1 rem, and then the border radius of 20 pixels, along with a max width. So whenever the screen size expands, it will only hit the max width of 600 pixels, and then the text align of center. So what we want to do is to import this from the page styles and then save all. And now you can see that has fixed that correctly. I also want to remove this home page in here. This was just a tester to see if the styles were working from styled components. So now let's save that. And now you can see they are pretty much matching each other here. And what we want to do now is implement the functionality for the search and the drop down into the grid. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way to do that is when we map the Pokemon card, we need to filter first based on whatever's in the search bar and the drop down. And we have used useState previously. So it's similar to React, where we can access React hooks, and then whatever the value is for search and whatever the value is for type, we can filter that in. So there's not much of a difference. This is just, Gatsby is just a React framework. So let's go ahead and filter the data out. So first, what I want to do is I want to filter out the Pokemon search data. So let's do that. So if there's no type and no search, then we want to return all of the Pokemon. If there is a type but there is no search, then what we want to do is return the Pokemon.types.includes the type. So essentially, what that means is if the Pokemon type that we are receiving from the API includes the type coming from the useState up top here, then we want to return that, and then that one is handled. If there is no type but there is a search value, then what we want to do is return Pokemon.name.to lowercase, and then it also includes search.to lowercase. So essentially, the API data, which is coming from Pokemon.name, if that is included within the search that we type in, then it returns that. And again, if the type and the search are both filled in, then what we want to do is return the Pokemon.type.includes the type. And what we want to do is do the same check again, which is checking for the name within the search as well. So essentially, that is everything there. So if I save, let's just double check that this works. Essentially, we have Charmander. What I'm going to do is we have a ghost type of Charmander, which isn't the case. So let's select Fire. And now you can see Fire is updating. If I delete this, and now we have the characters of Char. So the Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard will return. And if we just did C of Fire type, now you can see we have Magcargo, Cyndaquil, and Arcanine. What if I change this to the Electric type Pokemon? You can see now it's returning all of the Electric type Pokemon that contain the character C. And if I deleted that, and now you can see there's a few more that have turned up. So essentially, the functionality for the search bar and the drop down is working correctly. Let's just quickly check another type. So let's check Ghost, which is my favorite type of Pokemon. And you have Gengar here, which is rendering now. So the functionality is working. Right, so what we want to do next is when we click on a Pokemon, we want to navigate to its individual Pokemon page. So if we go in our final build and we click on Magnemite, you can see here this page is presented where it has further information on the Pokemon itself, and then we can also navigate back. But if you pay attention to the URL, it's /Pokemon / the Pokemon name. So in this case, it's Magnemite. If I went back to here and clicked Ivysaur, you can see it's /Ivysaur. So let's go ahead and implement this. And similar to other React frameworks, we have the link tag. So this link tag is from Gatsby. So we can essentially link to, and then we want to link to /Pokemon / the Pokemon.name. So let's go ahead and do that. And then also the key would move up to the higher level here. So we can remove it from here. And then what we just need to do is close this off. So now if I save, we are now importing the link from Gatsby here. And if we just test to see if this works, let's go ahead and click on Venusaur. And now what you can see here is these are the list of all of the pages that we have built on the application. So we need to create this wildcard page for Venusaur and the other Pokemon. So if we navigate to a random URL here, as you can see, what Gatsby does is it pre-builds all of the pages for you. So because it is a static site generator, so you can see here now that 258 pages are created, meaning that we have fetched 251 Pokemon, and then the rest, the other 7 are basically the rest of the applications or the other pages, whereas here we only have 7. So what we need to do is create that page as well. So let's go ahead and create that page. So in the pages folder, what I'm going to do is, because we are navigating to /Pokemon / the ID, I'm going to create a new folder called Pokemon, because we are navigating to /Pokemon, and this won't have an index page, so we won't create that. But what we will do is create the wildcard ID page. So to do that is similar to how we did the article. So if you look at here, we have the curly brackets and then something in here .tsx. So we just need to do the same here. So let's create a new file, curly brackets, and in our case it's going to be Pokemon.name, and then close the curly brackets .tsx. So now what we need to do is do RAFCE. So this now will be the individual Pokemon page, or you can name it whatever you want, but I'm just going to name it individual Pokemon page. And then here I'm just going to do react.fc, and I'm also going to render a p tag saying Pokemon page. So now if I save, what should happen now is Gatsby should build all of the pages for us. So essentially we shouldn't have 7 pages anymore. We should have 251 plus 7, so 258. So if we go into here and refresh the page, now what you should see is Venusaur should work because it's rendering and we have the Pokemon page rendering here. If I was to type in some wildcard after, now if we compare it, we still have 7 pages because these pages haven't been built. So we need to run the npm start script, and then all of the pages will be built at build time. So let's go back and you should see here 258. So in our console, in our terminal, what we need to do is run npm start again. So this will run Gatsby clean and Gatsby develop. It will then build all of the pages that we now have. So it will be 258 because essentially each of the Pokemon will have their own individual Pokemon page. Right, so now that Gatsby's built all of the pages, let's just double check that is working correctly. So if we refresh the page onto the home page, and I'm just going to click through to a random one, so like Ekans, and you can see now the Pokemon page is being rendered, so that's working correctly. And let's just see how many pages we have built on the application. So now you can see we have 258 and all the pages have built at build time, and you can see 158 more there. But essentially what Gatsby does is it's a static site generator and it runs and pre-builds all of the pages at build time, which is in turn good for SEO because then screen readers can read what is intercepting here and what is being returned to the browser. So that is the pages all they're working correctly, but now the issue is that we are rendering the Pokemon page. So now what we need to do is essentially click through to Pokemon, render this Pokemon card. So because we built the reusable Pokemon card component, all we need to do is query the relevant Pokemon, render it out onto here, and then also render these stats for the Pokemon over here along with the back button. So what we also need to do, because this is a new page, we are not fetching the data for all of the Pokemon this time because there isn't a query available for this. So if we go in console, we haven't got any Pokemon data. We have all Pokemon data, but that is what we need. This is on our final build. So if we go on here, inspect the page, And essentially what we need to do is fetch the Pokemon data. So going back into Gatsby and GraphiQL itself, in here, instead of all Pokemon now, we need to just go on to Pokemon and then fetch all of the data in here. So specifically, we need access to the stats, so attack, defense, HP, special attack, and so on. So this is just further information of the Pokemon data that we need. And now if we, for example, save this, you can see here now, these are the stats for the Pokemon that we require. So in this case, it's Bulbasaur because of the ID. But what we want to do is grab the ID or the name in our case. So grab Firo, and we want to filter that out in our graphical query here. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we can do is we can copy this query here. So copy that, and in our individual Pokemon page, we want to create a query. So export const of page query is equal to GraphQL, and then essentially we want to paste in the Pokemon query and close it off. We need to import GraphQL from Gatsby like so. And this time what we need to do is we need to have arguments in here where we fetch the ID. So essentially the name is coming from this here. So this curly brace here. So this is where we define what we want to select. So the name, which is equal to a string like so. And then the Pokemon is going to be relevant to the ID that we pass in. So in our case, it's going to be the name is equal to the name that we receive here. But what I want to do is I want to filter first of all. So filter, and essentially we want to get access to the name equal to the name like that. So now we should be able to console log the data being received from the props, and hopefully we should receive Pokemon that we are fetching in from the URL param. So let's go ahead and test this out. And the data is going to be the individual Pokemon data like this. So let's save that, go into our browser, and now what we should be doing is fetching Firo data. So if we refresh, and we're getting an error, so let's just go ahead and fix that. And what I need to do is just rename this to all Pokemon this time. So what we will do is we'll fetch from all the Pokemon data, but we will filter out. So let's save that, and let's just double check that works. So now we've refreshed the page. You can see here individual Pokemon data is coming through, and this should be for Firo. So let's just double check that is the correct one. So all Pokemon nodes, we want the first index, and the name is Firo here. We also have a type of normal and flying, and we also have the stats as well. So what we will do next is render this out for each Pokemon onto the page. Right, so now that we have the data coming through, we just need to render it out onto the page, like this one over here. So at the top, we have the back button, the Pokemon card, which we've already created, and then the Pokemon stats over here. So let's go ahead and do that. So in VS Code now, what I'm going to first of all do is get access to the Pokemon data. So we need to destructure the data and get access to it. So I'm just going to say const Pokemon is equal to data.allPokemon.nodes. And in this case, because we're filtering it out based on the name, we will get access to the first index because there will only be one index. So that's the Pokemon that we are fetching the data from. And now what I want to do is render the back button, which I've already created the styles for, and I'll bring that in. And I also want to render the Pokemon card, which is what we have already created earlier on for the grid on the home page. And I'm going to pass in the prop of Pokemon equal to this Pokemon here. So now what I need to do is import Pokemon card and also close this off. And then we also need to import the styles for the back button. So I will do that in a moment. But also what we want to do is render out the text for the stats. So let's add that in as well, just underneath. So essentially we have a text container styles component, and then we have the Pokemon types, which is essentially coming from the Pokemon. So Pokemon types is equal to Pokemon.types. And then because there's more than one on some items on types, we just want to join it with a comma and a space, and then the last one, it won't add it to that one anyway. So that is the Pokemon types. We have the attack. So again, we're accessing the stats.attack, stats.special attack, HP, and special defense. So these are these stats over here, and these are numbers. So essentially now that is all rendered on the page. We just need to implement the style for the back button and the text container. So let's go ahead and do that. And what I want to do is create a new styles page for the individual Pokemon. So this will be the Pokemon styles page, where you could call this individual Pokemon styles.ts. And in here, I'm just going to paste in what I have. Essentially, it's a div on the text container, just centralizing everything, and then also adding the color for the strong tags that we have on the left hand side for the stats. And then the back button, what we essentially are doing, this is a link. So with style components, what you can do is you can do the attrs append here, and essentially this is adding attributes to our link. And in our case, we want to link back to the home page here. And then we also have the styles for the back button as well. So all we need to do now is import them in. And now if I save all, and then if we hover over Pokemon card, in this case, it says property index is missing on type Pokemon. So essentially, Pokemon card receives props. So in this case, what we need is the index to be optional, because we're not mapping over anything. We essentially are just rendering out the one Pokemon card in here. So now you can see Fearow is being rendered along with its Pokemon stats in here. We are separating the types of Pokemons and rendering that out onto the page. There is one issue, which is this here, which we don't want to show in our final build, because this will be undefined because we're not passing in an index as a prop. So let's go back and let's test some more out. So let's test Blastoise. Again, that one's working correctly. And we also want to test another one that we haven't tested. So let's go ahead and test Stormy. So let's see that one again. That's working, and the index is still showing as NAN. So all we need to do is go into the Pokemon card component, and we need to handle this here. And the way to handle this is quite simple, is if index is not equal to undefined, and that is true, then we want to render index +1, otherwise we want to render null. And now if I save and go into here, we now have Stormy and it's not showing the NAN, and then the same for the other ones, and as you can see in the grid it is showing, so Charizard is not showing as well. So that is the project complete. What we have done is use Gatsby to build this Pokedex. We have a header that is being rendered. We have pre-built static pages that we have created based on fetching data coming from the Gatsby source PokeAPI. We also have implemented search functionality, so you can see now we can filter the Pokemon type, and if it's bug, it's not going to show Ghastly. It will only show when we have the ghost type. If we set the Pokemon type as the default and also remove this, we have all of the Pokemon being rendered. We can click through to individual Pokemon on here so that we can render and showcase further stats for the Pokemon. And we also have a Gatsby blog using MDX files. We fetch all of the blog data using the Gatsby GraphiQL queries, and then what we can also do is click through and render out the individual Gatsby markdown files. Anyway, so I hope you learned a lot from this video and this crash course on Gatsby. What I would recommend is for you to build your own project in Gatsby and share it with me and let me know if this crash course helped you a lot in using Gatsby for the first time. I would also research the Gatsby plugin marketplace because there's a lot of cool integrations that you can have. If you want to see me do more Gatsby videos, then please comment in the video below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.